So you have worked on school campuses and universities. How
Mhm.
would you generalize or give an overview of the state of mental health among students and our youth?
It's very interesting, the dynamic, because at one side of things, there's so much access to so much information and an access to more professionals as far as gaining an awareness. But at the same time, you also have an inability to really have a one-on-one with a therapist. So there's a newfound awareness that has brought like a tremendous amount of anxiety to our youth, and then they have gone through so much more than I can imagine at their age. So I would say we are in a very interesting crisis type place right now, just because there's no way of not knowing what's going on around us.
Are there areas of struggle you see more than others?
Yes. So I have noticed a theme of family issues. So as far as parent communication with teens, that has been an overarching theme. And if it's not, they're usually not aware of how healthy or unhealthy a dynamic is. That is one. I would also mention trauma of all sorts. Historically, I think we think of trauma being consistently violent and leaving physical wounds, when a lot of times there's a lot of emotional wounds that are being impressed and imprinted on this population. And the parents are unaware that what they're doing
Mm.
may be a little bit the way it impacts them. And so having family discussions, I have family sessions a lot more than historically I feel like we have, because I don't think that we are as aware of how much our family shapes us. And that can be an amazing thing, but it can also leave wounds that we don't even know are there. So,
So you were saying that you can sit down with both the parents
mhm,
and the teen and
mhm.
provide like a safe environment
Yes.
where things can be said and you can moderate and you can get to the bottom of emotions and feelings. Who do
Yeah.
you think has more problems in communicating, the teen or the parent?
Interesting enough. Okay. So I would say the parent, and I will say this with caution, because a lot of times I feel like it's really hard to communicate because it's two different languages. So we have the parents' language, where it's a lot of times black and white thinking, and a little bit of distortion, or just concrete, it's my way or the highway, authoritarian. And I feel like that the way that one was parented, our parents were parented, doesn't always land with this generation, just because there is a lack of feeling heard amongst teens. I mean, teens receive all types of messages and have to shift shape, just how they interact with all the different environments. But it's hard to really communicate with parents without there being feeling of, I know I'm the expert on my child, or they just won't listen, it's them, not me. And even if they don't communicate that, I see that quite often, where a parent will bring in a kid to me and say, well, he's just not cleaning up, and he's not just, like saying all the actions and the behavior without really understanding that they're all connected to an emotion.
So the parent will seek you out in hopes
Mhm.
that you will fix their teen?
Yeah. And I get that a lot. Like whenever it's me one on one with the teen, they feel that, and they act out because of it, and feel like they can't really trust any adult. And that has been really interesting navigating with all of my clients, because I want to say almost immediately I mentioned our relationship is far more important than the alliance that your parents may want to form with me to get to you. and just coming and meeting them where they are and saying, "Hey, I am not judging you. I see the way the world is right now. I also would be doing a lot of the things that you're doing, or trying to figure out a way to cope with everything that's going on." And then to have someone speak a different language than you, it feels like that within your own home, that can be really lonely.
In your experience, do you think the parents feel disrespected and also that the teen feels disrespected?
That is a common theme. Oof, the respect component. And so I've noticed that, and don't get me wrong, I know these parents are also struggling. I mean, they're having to raise kids in a time that's so unsure. And so their anxiety is like through the roof, if they want to name it that or not. That's kind of the different experiences they have. But I feel like there is some kind of disconnect happening. So trust is something, and respect. A lot of times respect is assumed for the parents without any regard of, hey, how am I coming off to my child? How are they, how am I being able to communicate effectively is really like a question that I have to kind of gently bring up, because you don't want to make a parent feel like they're a bad parent, because they're
Right.
not.
Mhm.
And that is something I always communicate whenever I first have the parent come in with me, is I always tell them, hey, we are on the same team. We are both wanting to make sure that little whomever your child feels safe, and they are being given a space to kind of communicate and kind of talk things out. But you're the expert on your child, and just kind of letting them know that I want to work with them and not against them. And that kind of lowers the flag in their fist.
Mhm. Mhm.
They feel more seen, because at the end of the day, the parents also want to feel heard. And a lot of times I end up hearing that the parents are also going through their own struggles. And I always ask, well, do you have a therapist too?
Mhm.
Because we're all suffering in different ways. I mean, I always tell my clients, I also have a therapist, because every good therapist needs a therapist.
Is there a difference between not knowing how to communicate with parents as an authoritarian figure as opposed to do they also not know how to communicate with teachers and adults in general?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So is there a potential disconnect or a correlation with how
Mhm.
they? Yeah, so I have noticed that it can go both ways. So I have clients who, mostly if they don't have a good relationship with this parent, and it's to the point of they don't live with the parent, or if this parent kind of verbally, said some really harsh things that left wounds, I often see that that correlates with the happiness of their own work life,
Mm,
their own workload, their own success. I'm just thinking of, even with, I have a lot of kids that come from higher incomes.
mhm,
They are their parents are CEOs of companies and very high up in their corporations, but a lot of times they have it's just a different type of trauma happening. There's a feeling of, they're second to their job, so
mm,
there's that type, but then there's also a type of, I want to say, parents that are stressed and trying to work three jobs. They're also kind of taking it out on the kids. So as I'm saying this, I'm like, wow, no, it doesn't matter the success or, the workload. I think it's just a different type of impact. If there's no balance, then there's no health, essentially. Long story short.
perhaps we think of mental health issues as those with depression or anxiety or those contemplating suicide. What other
Right.
areas of mental health issues are you seeing?
I am seeing more and more of mental health issues such as OCD, an increase in that, just a lack of control, and it turns into compulsive behaviors, trying to figure out how to cope with different environments that they may have never had control over. That is one that I see quite often. ADHD,
Mm.
that is a big one. I personally have ADHD combined type. So there's no more ADD. It's strictly ADHD type 1, which is inattentive. So they get distracted easily. And then type 2, where they're more hyperactive. And so I have the combined type. And so I get the best of both. And that is very, I feel like it's more increasingly stemming from maybe a collective trauma of all the shifts in the world that we've gone through. It's really common for people to be like, oh, ADHD is overdiagnosed, and I do think that sometimes we come across where sometimes we're kids know how to function without medicine, but that does not mean that the symptoms aren't there, that they don't fit criteria. It's just a matter of how bad do you have it at this point, especially with screens. Growing up on these in a digital era
Mhm.
where all their work is digital, it's kind of bound to happen.
Mhm. I had read probably a little bit of research that parents wanted to blame lack of play, lack of outside play on
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, as well as Reels and TikTok. You get short spurts of
Yes.
information that you can deal with. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in your opinion, has all this contributed to
The
us not
just
having an attention span?
Yes. Oh, okay. So hear me out. I know there may be some parents that say, "Oh, see, a licensed therapist said ADHD comes from video games."
Mhm,
It's a yes. So the basically, for example, the more that I'm on TikTok, the more I see that my ADHD gets out of hand. They are influential factors. I do feel like, and based on things that we've found, they are a huge impact. But we are basically coming to a point where without communication and that stimulation of TikTok or Reels, you're also potentially more at risk for depression because that's the way they communicate, that's the way
mhm.
they connect, that's how they I don't know, learn more. So it's like you can't win without giving one or the other.
Which leads me to this question. How much of our intake from what we consume or are exposed to in social media, television, and the internet, how does that contribute to anxiety or thought attacks that erode our stability?
Wow, that is such a good question. I know that for example, I know that when it impacts the way I think and interact. So, for example, if I start noticing that I am more alert and more depressed throughout the day after consuming a certain amount of social media, that is a sign that my body is telling me it's a little too much or there needs to be a check in. And that regular check-in is kind of what's missing, I feel like, with Gen Z sometimes. They're just told get off of it. You know, that phone is like the source. If I had $1 for every time a parent told me that it's the phone, and it's like, no, I mean, yes,
Mhm.
but it's we're discrediting the importance of it, and you can't just completely take things away and it like just think that that is going to fix everything. So moderation is a huge thing that will help with contributing or just decreasing anxiety and depression. I mean, looking at the news, I feel like it is very focused on negative because naturally, for some reason, as humans, we love tragedy.
Mhm.
I mean, we watch crime shows, we watch podcasts. I mean, it's kind of addicting, and I am a culprit of that. I like it, but I have to, the more that I am in tune with myself, the more that I'm like, I need to do that in moderation. So a
Mhm.
lot of times now I will hear from a client, hey, did you hear about this? Oh, no, I didn't, because I'm trying to protect my emotional wellness. We
Mhm.
don't have to know everything unless it's directly impacting me. Like, that is my personal choice. I know there's a certain level of awareness we do need to have. For example, a tornado, if that's coming and if we hear something about that. But when it comes to tragedies of the world, there is one on every street if we really want to talk
Mhm.
about tragedy. But it's just protecting our mind and our heart is really important to just being able to function each day.
Do you recommend a certain amount of time to abstain from being on your phone before bed?
Yes, and I feel like a hypocrite for saying it because I am such a, okay, I gotta check this and this. I will say that I recommend for anyone. I mean, I know my dad and my stepmom, they taught me a while ago, or told me how they try to leave their phones outside the bedroom. And I was like, wow, that is such a good idea. So, and then cell phones, and then also TV.
Yes.
Trying not to have a TV in your bedroom. Me and my husband, we don't have a TV. We don't keep a TV in there because we are trying to train our brain to be restful whenever we are at home. And so, especially when you have ADHD, if you associate your bed with phone and TV, it's going to be harder to fall asleep. So, just having designated times and areas for those, and I would say maybe 30 minutes of just before you go to bed to an hour. I know scientists say anything specific, like more specific and maybe longer, but I found for me, if I just take 30 minutes to decompress, turn on some of that yoga music that you hear at massage therapist, doing a body scan, that kind of calms your circadian rhythm and
Mhm.
just make it easier to fall asleep and enjoy deep sleep.
Do you think that sometimes we are afraid and do not know how to be alone with ourselves anymore? We're afraid that emotions might be revealed, or sadness or happiness.
Mhm.
Are we self-aware anymore?
Oh, I feel like you sat in with like half of my sessions just now. I tell my clients all the time, especially my Gen Zers, you are using other things to escape your emotions, and your body will tell you to cut it out soon enough. Yes, that I do feel like we are so used to going, that a lot of times when we go to bed thinking, oh my gosh, why can't I sleep? Why am I so anxious? It's because if you ignore it, it's going to show up some kind of way. And that goes for Gen Z, that goes for adults. If you don't check in with yourself and take time for yourself, it will impact somatically. So you will see it in some kind of way. We kind of use, like I said before, other people. Sometimes we may use work, we may use productivity, and that's how we measure how well we are, when realistically that is just pushing down any other emotions or any other things that we commonly face or things that we've never addressed.
Is this generation too sensitive, absorbing the pain of the world and feeling incapable of fixing it, putting them at risk for a mental health crisis?
That that is a very good question. So I feel, so the term ignorance is bliss.
Mhm.
I feel like inadvertently we have no, well, Gen Z, I will say, I'm a millennial, so I'm right there in the middle.
Mhm.
I feel like they are experiencing the after effect of ignorance is bliss. I feel like historically we've kind of ignored a lot of things going on, and we didn't have access to it.
Mhm.
And so now there is a wave of overload. So they have all this information. It went from their parents not really, they have one source and they're good with it, to, oh my gosh, I have all these sources, accurate or inaccurate, sad or happy. And so now there's like this overload, and and a regulation needing or starting to happen where they're like, okay, is this okay? Is this a lot? And so I feel like there's a spectrum to all beliefs and all I don't know, reactions. And I do feel like a lot of times they're just trying to figure it out.
Mhm.
And so I always tell parents, or I like to tell older generations, just kind of put yourself in their shoes. I mean, you went from, only getting your information from a textbook to now being more aware, yeah, the world is kind of broken,
Mhm.
and trying to fix that. I mean, I'm a natural fixer. A lot of parents are natural fixers because they want to help their children cope, but they're turning into doers. And so dealing with that shift is really difficult. And I do feel like we are in an imperfect world. So it is common for, human error.
Mhm.
But I also feel like there's a lot to be done and to be fixed or done a little bit more with people in mind instead of a system. And that is something that I am excited for Gen Z to do.
I believe they are a generation who they care.
Mhm.
They care about climate change, they care about their friends, they do care about their family, and they care about what their children will be
Mhm.
left after them. So what patterns have you recognized as destructive coping mechanisms?
I think the overconsumption of anything. So I will say I am starting to see a more spontaneous impulsivity happening. So you have basically also the assumption, these a lot of the younger generation of, oh, older people don't know what they're talking about, which in a way, yes, they aren't going through what you're going through. You're the only generation going through this, but there is some warning to certain things that are relevant. For example, don't take drugs from random people.
Mhm.
I have personally lost quite a few friends to fentanyl, that epidemic going on right now, and just thinking that, I just need something to cope instead of therapy. Alcohol, I feel like alcohol is so common and so accepted, but it's actually a pretty sizable comparison to drugs as far as death, ways to coping. It's so normalized to drink whenever, but there's either don't do it at all or it's okay, you can do it whenever. So trying again, just moderation is something that we don't know how to do because there's so much black and white thinking, I feel like, going on in the world right now.
And what would be good coping mechanisms?
Having a community,
Mm.
I feel like I have more and more clients who like to be alone. And I get it. I love my me time. I value my me time. I protect it. But isolation, there's me time, then there's isolation. And I feel like we are creeping into that. So having a community, that is, if you can't find a therapist or have access to one, just having someone to be there with you and walk you through it, because we want to talk to people that understand, not people who necessarily live with us, but someone from the outside that can give us something to talk about, something that we have alike, something we have in common. I really urge everyone needs a therapist right now. We are going through so much, Gen Z, millennials, just all these crises that are uprising in our world, and there's a lot more reflection and realization of we probably went through some type of trauma growing up. So processing that in a safe and therapeutic environment is a lot more helpful, with the way we communicate with each other, the way our relationships turn out. I commonly see the aftermath in a lot of my clients of a failed communication between individuals in a marriage, and then they see the way that their parents communicated, and it's starting to impact the way they communicate with their parent, and they're like, why are they being like this? And it's like, well, they're trying to figure it out.
So the loneliness epidemic, let's talk about online versus in-person relationships, because we were talking about building a community. Does one have more benefit than the other?
Yeah, I've found that I have to do therapy a little differently. For example, we are a lot more shy and awkward after isolation of COVID and just going through that whole shift in the way we do things. And so, because this is such a new way to communicate and it's so foreign, especially to older generations, a lot of times we assume that it's bad. Where in reality, COVID, we saw in COVID through numbers that thank goodness for things like social media, where they
Mhm.
saw other teens going through the same thing. I mean, it's like they say the new normal.
Mhm.
So I honestly think that that online community kind of breaks down a lot of the barriers of thinking, oh gosh, what if this person judges me? Oh my gosh, what if this person goes back, and you just have a safe space. Should it be regulated or checked? That's up to, I feel like, the parents. Yeah, that's a whole nother topic.
You don't feel that we are continuing to isolate ourselves even though we no longer have to?
I feel like, again, that balance is starting to be interfered. I think that having, if you do have an online community, it's good to have an in-person community as well, at least one or two people to check in with, because a lot of times we find that online communities can also be a ground for no, I don't know, just not any checks or balances. And so it's so rapidly changing and it's so fast that we may not be aware of the overall impact of social media harming us, but at the same time, we're not really sure how it's helping us yet.
Mhm.
So it's a 50-50, I'd say. But
Mhm.
overall, having someone in person, at least one or two, could help, I don't know, ground the person. Because
Mhm.
I've also seen that go for a dark turn, only having an online community. That's often when the abuse happens. We have a lot more new terms that are about to come out, as far as in studies showing that sometimes grounds for abuse, internet addictions, not knowing the difference between too much. But again, that's with any issue. And I
Mhm.
think because it's a newer addiction, it is something that scares. New is scary a lot of times to older generations and any generation. It's a little bit of both.
I think one of the challenges of being solely relying on social media or online connections would be that it's almost given us permission to be unkind,
Mm,
where
yeah.
we can be more bold in perhaps acting out our frustration and taking it out on others. So, I don't know, hopefully we find caring communities and not
Yeah.
bullying communities.
Yeah, that's that checks and balance I'm talking about. Yeah. So I completely agree that there is this extremism that happens, just this extreme out, as you said, to just basically say whatever we want. And
Mhm,
that can kind of take out the social regulation of, should I say this?
mhm,
Am I overreacting? And there's that. And so I'm starting to see with my high school clients just the nastiness and the numb, and sometimes I'm starting to see some calloused formation of, well, they say that type of stuff to me all the time.
mhm,
So I don't think anything of saying really, really dark things.
no filter.
That's what's, yeah, no filter. And that can
Mhm.
be kind of alarming. And there's a whole chain of events that can come from that.
Well, some people are more sensitive than others, and a
Mhm.
wrong word, not really meant in any harm, but taken personally by someone who's already suffering from depression or anxiety can really press their buttons.
I absolutely, so I oftentimes, a lot of my clients are the one that's labeled the sensitive one. I mean, I was labeled the sensitive one in my family. I still am.
Mhm.
And they'll, every time I come around, they're like, oh, Leah, make sure you don't say anything around her because she's going to go on that mental health rant. And I'm like, yeah, I am.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times I always empower my clients to tell them, you are not the sensitive one, you are the sensitive and tuned one.
Mm.
And just reminding them that there's nothing wrong with being hurt by what people say. I think that a lot of times we don't really think before we speak. And even though we don't mean it a certain way, that's it's still not okay, regardless of if it wouldn't hurt the person that is communicating this harmful thing. If it wouldn't hurt you, that does not mean that you are the measurement for how it impacts other people. Do I think that there's also a regulation that may need to happen? A lot of times I don't see it. I don't see where they say something super light. It's always something that maybe historically their parent may have said to them, our parents' parent. But when you hear it out loud, it's like, that it's not okay to say that. And it is harmful. And this generation's more aware of how harmful it is.
If you were to receive a text from someone that appeared suicidal in their
Mhm.
messaging, what should you do, and what is the best response?
I would love to give a seminar on that. I worked with the Foundation for Suicide Prevention, as I told you
Mhm.
before this interview, and that is a training that they have trainings available to the public on their website, and I think that they go more in depth as to how to handle things based on your perspective or your role in someone's life. I often get at least one or two texts of crisis on the weekends. We have a crisis line at my clinic, and but a lot of times they just want to reach out to their therapist. And there is a difference that we see between, okay, I'm really low and I'm really needing to communicate with my therapist just so she can hold me accountable. And then there's warning signs of, okay, and sometimes they're not signs, there's little small indicators of if they withdraw, and that's when a lot of times there is thought of acting out and doing carrying out that the suicide. So I think just continuing to be connected to the happy ones. A lot of my clients that are high risk are the happiest, most caring, most hilarious clients people have ever met. And a lot of times that's their way of coping. They care about others because they hate themselves.
Mm.
And that is something that I have, it has shocked me with Gen Z. I mean, I had a client the other day tell me, I truly don't like myself.
Mm.
And it's, these kids are 12, 13. And I mean, it breaks your heart because you're wondering, how do we get here? But then also you got to look at the environment of, the way that people are interacting with them, what they are feeling when they're alone, what are they looking at? I mean, all those factors. And then genetically, a lot of times we have genetic component. Mental illness is a genetic component. A lot of times parents who were, just because they weren't diagnosed, they think, oh, I don't know where that came from.
Mhm.
Well, I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until I was 20 or 21. So it can be a very late diagnosis, and the way people cope is to keep moving. And that's not really great.
What tips would you have to give a positive outlook for someone trying to survive in a negative environment?
My number one tip, and just, I don't know, just something that I urge and try to tell all my clients, all their parents, try not to be so positive and look for positive validation and saying, I hear you and I understand you, and finding someone like that can make all the difference. I think that there is an accidental toxic positivity that happens. I
Mm.
mean, I've had friends who, they will be like, well, Leah, and then, but I don't, I know these things, but it doesn't make me feel seen. And that's what
Mhm.
someone who is struggling, they want to know that they're heard and that they're not alone. And so when we tell them a lot of positivity, that creates a ground of, okay, well, there is something wrong with me because I don't feel that way.
Mhm.
So I would just tell anyone, we are all going through it. You are not the only person struggling. I mean, I talk to my therapist friends every day, and we always joke and we're like, how many times do our sessions turn into, yeah, same here, girl. I'm also battling depression.
Mhm.
That connection that they feel with just anyone around them can make the difference of someone losing their life. And I don't think enough people know that positivity is so accessible, but validation isn't. And so that is, I feel like, one of the biggest keys in finding a community, talking to your counselor, talking to someone that you feel is safe, who doesn't judge you. That is the best thing I can think of. And if you don't have that, texting the number that we just put in place, 988, getting in contact with them, and they can connect you with someone who will validate you.
So, if you could speak directly to someone, what would you say directly to someone who is feeling crushed by emotional pain, specifically about emotional pain itself?
The world is very heavy right now, and it's not your fault. This world is broken, and that's not your fault. You are feeling the weight of something that isn't yours, something that you didn't create, your situation, your environment, and you are not alone in that. It's hard to believe that, because a lot of times we see the positive externally of everyone else, but you would be surprised at how many people feel the exact same way you do. And just with that community hopefully will make things feel a little bit doable.
What would you say directly to someone who feels unloved?
I would tell that person that you are worth being loved, and I hate that they don't feel that they have that. Being just existing right now, I feel like you have every right and desire and need of having someone support you and show you that support. And if you don't have that, you deserve it. And there are people that would love to give it to you.
What would you say directly to someone feeling an inability to express themselves, or perhaps someone who feels dismissed and not heard?
Mm, wow. Yeah, that is a common theme. I would say, again, it's not your fault that you're like this. And I think a lot of self exploration and reflection and getting to know yourself in any way you can explore, hey, do I really like music? And just starting from wherever you are at. Whenever I have clients who do have almost a calloused heart because they were taught that feelings were bad, I always try to meet them where they are at, whether that is music, whether there's art. Because if you feel something for something somewhere, we can figure out how to make sense of emotion from that starting point.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good. What would you say directly to someone feeling the pressures of comparison and measuring themselves by others' perceived standards?
Mm. Self-worth is something that only you can give. So validation from others and comparison, as we hear, is the thief of anything joyful. You will never be satisfied if you do it, if you compare yourself. There is no social construct that can really just encompass the beauty that each individual has. And so learning to look at yourself in a healthy way and figuring out how to, and self-love is the only way you'll end up truly being happy with yourself.
Is that going to be a difficult task for someone who doesn't love themselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see that self-love and self-worth is the stem of a lot of the disorders that I deal with. And it's something that has to remain consistent and require a lot of times someone to hold you accountable.
What does that look like?
So I have a saying with one of my clients, less of others, more of me. And so I encourage them to each night reflect more on, what did I do well today? And if that is something that they can't do, I say, okay, what do people tell you positive about yourself? And if that's not accessible, I encourage them to start, I don't know, challenging themselves to look at themselves and think back on things that they did that week and say, huh, that's really cool that I do this, or I have the tendency to protect my family, or I really love how well I am at taking care of my dog. That shows that I care. I have a big heart.
What would you say directly to someone being bullied because they are judged as being different?
I would first ask for their number so I can go beat them up myself. No, I'm just kidding. um, I I would really encourage anyone who witnesses these things, please speak up. Maybe not even the person who is going through it. I know we all notice bullying, and it's lame to report it, but that can be the very difference between that kid doing some unthinkables to self and others. So it's a matter of seeming uncool and being alive sometimes. So I encourage anyone, someone who's going through it, who sees it, speak up, because that can be a huge difference, especially today in America where we are right now.
What would you say directly to someone feeling lonely?
I would say that we are in a place where just in our world right now where every people are lonely even amongst a room full of people. And when it gets to that, I really encourage connecting with a professional because I feel like oftentimes we may look to our friends and seek encouragement from them, and that's okay. But sometimes that encouragement isn't exactly the source of where you need to get it from. So just talking to someone, a grown up, maybe not a grown up, but just a professional, someone that you know can put you in connection with someone who can give you resources to therapy, because feeling alone is very common, especially post COVID. That isolation has created a weird feeling when we're alone sometimes, especially when we go through these mental, or not this mental, but whenever we have these COVID cycles that hit again, or natural disasters that causes people to
Mm.
stay at home. That is often when we see almost like a PTSD of, oh no, the body thinks it's going to go into isolation. So just being aware of that and being proactive, I think, would be the most helpful.
What would you say directly to someone who is experiencing emotional aggression towards themselves or towards others?
Oh, I love the way you frame that. I would encourage that person to kind of look at what's going on in their life overall. Is there something uncomfortable or something that they're not being honest with themselves about? Or someone else, if they're not happy with the way a relationship is that impacting the way that you interact with other people? And kind of look externally of, wow, okay, something is off. And just that self-awareness, just gaining self-awareness can kind of help, I don't know, create a system and steps towards bettering yourself and checking yourself when you do feel like you are acting out.
What would you say to someone experiencing hate towards another because they feel they have been wronged?
I actually went over this in group yesterday with my junior high. That is, ooh, conflict resolution is our kryptonite at that age. And oftentimes later on in life, it just looks different. I would say you are only in control of yourself. So if that means that you need to step away from that friendship, do so, or step away from that situation, do so. You will never be able to change. You can inform someone of how that made you feel. And I encourage anyone to do that in a very healthy way, whatever that may look like. But a lot of times we have to remember that we have the choice and the power to walk away. And we are only responsible for our um, just our reactions.
What does conflict resolution mean to this generation?
Nothing. No. Um, it me what it what it looks like, I'll say that, is having the regulation and the ability to resolve a disagreement without disruption. That may be bullying on social media. That may be disagreeing with a friend. And so we have to figure out how to respond to that. And then just not getting along with parents or family. And I always urge the client to, whenever they are wanting to resolve that conflict, or first figure out if it is a relationship that they want to salvage and if it's good for them. Then after that, if they do decide that they should move forward, I encourage them to check in with yourself before you go in and make sure that you are coming into the conversation that needs to be had with your fist down and ready to just have a helpful, resourceful, beneficial communication and conversation, or else you're really not changing anything, and you are just going to stay in the conflict.
Do you think the world right now as a whole has set a good example on on conflict resolution?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It is so. I often tell my husband I feel like we're in a simulation, because the reversal, or the regression of maturity and ability, it's not coupled with what a lot of times I hear, sensitivity and everyone's too sensitive.
Mm,
It's ironically that those people that say that are often also the people who will not even stand to listen to
mm,
others. Active listening is a skill that I feel like should be mandatory, starting in kindergarten, but straight from the womb,
mhm,
but it also needs to be modeled. Um, I think that right now, just showing what is tolerated and what is okay, that there truly isn't a clear indicator unless they're in a healthy environment, that what conflict resolution even looks like.
mhm,
It's a respect dominance thing that is to be created in order to get things done, and that's just not how the world works. That's not how human nature is meant to interact with each other, and
mhm,
we're seeing the result of that, I feel like.
mhm. We're seeing that it has not been successful. What would you say to someone who just needs to know that someone cares?
I want to tell them that although even I may not have gone through whatever they are experiencing, I, among others, really do care about you. I may not know you,
Mhm,
but I truly, my goal is for people like you or anyone else to just know that somebody sees them, even if they feel like no one does. If I had a huge house that can house every misfit feeling individual, I would have it, because no one should ever feel like that, especially you.
What do you think the key to breaking the stigma of mental health and prioritizing the care of being mindfully healthy is?
Modeling that you care. I think the more that we embrace the change and be the change, that meaning being completely open about how one is feeling and practicing openness, I think that is the first step to getting rid of that lonely feeling of feeling like, oh, that person has it together. No, they don't.
Mm,
Being vulnerable, I think, is was often, especially, I feel like I was even taught vulnerability can sometimes be a weakness,
mhm,
but I have found connecting with the hardest or the most calloused client has always been being honest, telling
mhm,
them, yeah, I also battle depression.
mhm.
Yeah, I get that. It is hard. I may, yeah, you know, you may feel like I have it together. I absolutely don't. I am all over the place always, and I will never pretend to be something I'm not.
Miss Leah, I so appreciate your time today. You mentioned a hotline. What is that
Yes.
hotline?
It is 988, and that's it.
And is that national?
That is national, yes.
National. So
Mhm.
988. And wanted to give you an opportunity to anything that I didn't ask you. Feel free to share your closing thoughts.
I just want to say first, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Oh, my
It,
pleasure.
it's been amazing. I want to end with just encouraging connection and openness, especially amongst Gen Z and family. I really would encourage anyone who has the ability and the access to go seek a mental health resource, go for it. We can all be better. Going to a therapist is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of taking care of your entire self and taking care of it seriously.
I think if I would like to add anything is that there are people who care in this world. And I think we always hear that phrase, you have to find your people. And sometimes that seems like it's very hard to do, but I honestly think you don't have to look very far to find someone who will care. It may mean that you need to reach out and be proactive for your
Mhm.
own benefit. But if that's the case, do it. Don't be shy. Push for your health, push for your mental health, because it not only benefits you, it benefits society. And
Absolutely.
I kinda took away your closing thoughts, so you go again.
No, I'm like, that was so good. How did that, Leah?
No.
Just reaching across whatever aisle is there, kind of like what you pointed out,
Mhm,
there are resources. I guarantee it. If you want a community and you want to feel seen, there are people around you that feel the exact same way. I
mhm,
mean, they may be next door, they may be in your school, in your workplace. I just want everyone to just understand that checking on your strong friend, all like check on everyone.
mhm,
Just please check on everyone because we are all in this world together, whether we look alike or not.
mhm.
We want connection.
Leah Childress, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.